You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Thursday, folks. Or should I say happy Coronavirus Thursday. Are you under self-sequestration, just like we are over here at our house? I mean, it's not extreme, but it's there, and we're trying to behave and all of that stuff. But first, you're listening to me, Scotty Roberts, here on the Odyssey Radio Network with my program, the Intrepid Radio Program. And that's Odyssey1.com, ODYSY1.com, to hear the audio version of this, see all the different outlets where this show plays, and check out all the scheduling over at Odyssey Radio. And you can see the lineup that can fill your day while you're sitting at home, twiddling your thumbs, drumming your fingers, trying to figure out what to do with your time, unless you're working from home or watching children at home. Whichever it may be. You can also come over to my YouTube channel and watch this show in a video simulcast. And the best feature of the YouTube channel is that you can join the public chat room there. It's a live chat room going on while the show is airing, right now, as a matter of fact, if you're not there already. And you can join in, add your 2 cents worth, get to know the Intrepid family over there, and, have a good time. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, as you can see here today, if you're watching the video, I'm in celebration of self-sequestration. Is that a word? The way to say that? Self-sequestering, limiting our contact with the outside world. I'm wearing my Mickey Mouse robe. There he is. There's Mickey. Yeah, there. Just so you know, he's here too. And a scarf. Scarf which Rocky will mock, but the Stucci just wishes that he had a scarf as stylish as my red scarf. It reminds me of that song, your red scarf matches your eyes. You close your cover before striking. I don't know if any of you know that. What is that, from the 20s or something like that? I don't know why I still know that. Oh, yeah, I do, because it was on a show, a kid's show. When I was a kid, the Casey Jones Show on Channel 11, if you're local to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It was at noon every day, then they expanded to also doing at 4 o'clock when kids come home from school. That's back when we didn't have cable TV, back in the 60s and the 70s. And a local actor played Casey Jones, the train engineer, and his sidekick Roundhouse Rodney. And they always did these little skits in between cartoons and things. And they had the live audience. It was a lot like the, the mannequin doll in the 40s and the 50s. Not Charlie McCarthy. Oh, Howdy Doody. It was a lot like you see film clips of the old Howdy Doody show. It was patterned after that. The noon show was just them sitting there doing cartoons and skits. The afternoon show, after school, had kids in the audience. And so that's where that came from. It was a skit they did, and I saw that 1,000,000 times on Casey Jones. They'd play that skit with that song, Your Red Scarf Matches Your Eyes. You can go look it up on YouTube. I think they have some warbler from the 20s or the 30s saying, your red scarf matches your eyes. It's something like that. You know how they warbled. Your red scarf matches your eyes. I can't even pretend to do it. But there you go. There's scintillating radio for you, folks. Let's move on. And so Rocky would think that this red scarf in my robe, I think he wouldn't care about the robe part. But the red scarf, he would mock it. He's just jealous that he doesn't have one. So, and he really wants mine. Moving on. So, if you're at home from work, and Rocky and I have talked about this a couple of days, There's some anger points that could be listed about companies that won't send their employees home, but the people making those decisions are working from home. I see a double standard there, and that makes me bristle, but let's move even beyond that and just say you're working at home, or you've got a couple 3 involuntary weeks off of work because your company's closed because of the sequestering and the quarantining and things like that. And let's say you've got kids and you got kids at home. One thing I've noticed is the anger in my kids. Now, it's not about coronavirus. They're not angry about politics. They're not angry about the president or the decisions he makes. They're angry about, who's got the remote for the television. It's my turn to choose a cartoon. Or, that's my book. What are you doing touching my book? Hey, that's my toy. Get your hands off my toy. Fighting and yelling and bickering. And so what we've noticed in the first couple of days of our kids being home, not things we didn't notice in the past, but now and it's a little too cool to just say, go outside and play. So they still have to put on coats and stuff to go outside. They can do it. It's 40, 45 degrees and no snow on the ground anymore. But they're in the house. And they're in the house all day. And I work at home, so I'm always here. My wife works at home. She's always here. And so we've got the added thing of 3 children who want to pile on questions and bickers and tattles and fights and this and that and the other thing on mom and dad. It usually lands on Rainey. And I tell them, hey, leave your mom alone. Come and see dad. I'll take care of this. And they don't want to come and see dad because dad renders justice. So not that mom doesn't, but mom has to deal with it while she's doing other things. And so anyway, you know the situation. So I thought I would talk a little bit today. I was going to talk about kids and how to get kids to express their feelings to you. Stuff like that. Now, those of you in my audience, I know in the chat room there's not lots of you that have small kids at home anymore. And you've gone beyond the stage of having small kids at home. Some of you have teens at home. Some of you babysit your grandkids, and you have kids around. And so, which, by the way, is another topic all by itself. Why do grandparents babysit their kids? So their kids can go to work. Now, I understand there are times where single parents need to work. Sometimes 2 parents need to work just to make ends meet. And look at how our society's changed. Grandma and Grandpa raise the kids while the kids go to work. That's a different topic all in itself, as I said, and we'll tackle that another day. Certainly not condemning it. I'm just saying our society, that's indicative of our society like none other. So, right now, if you've got kids at home, I want to try to cover a couple of things that might help you understand them a little bit. I want to talk about feelings and stuff and kids' feelings. That's an important issue to know something about. But at the same time, the articles I was calling up and the information I'm looking at was all so psychobabbly, I didn't even want to get into it. So I'm avoiding that topic today. And instead, I want to move into, and I've got a bunch of different things up here that I want to talk about. I want to talk about children's anger management and strategies that work for that, for effective ways that you can help your child manage their own angers about things. I also have 4 signs that you, as a parent, or maybe you're single, but as an adult, are the child of a toxic parent, and ways to manage the relationship and to preserve your emotional health. And I want to talk about boundaries and the dance of the codependent. Codependency, big psychobabbly word that's emerged over the last couple of decades. It's how to love yourself and your relationship with others. And so I've got all of these things up in front of me, and we'll see how far we get with these. But I wanted to start out by talking about managing your child's anger. Now, this can range from little kids to older kids. It's like I've got my 10-year-old son who was this joyful, happy child, always, dingleberries and Huck Finn all rolled together, happy-go-lucky, always joking around, always having a fun time. And he's turned into like an angsty 10-year-old. Now, how much of that does he pull off of mom and dad? Probably a hell of a lot. So when I see anger in my son and I see him being angsty, I have to ask the questions. Are there things that we're not doing right as parents? Are there things that we should be instilling or modeling for him and our other two little children who now the 8-year-old girl is starting to get a little more angry. She gets yelled at a lot because she's the middle child. The middle children always have the middle child syndrome. I was a middle child. And, the kids are into lying. And they lie about stuff that's just stupid. It's like, hey, did you leave this pen on the carpet on the floor without the cap on? Did you know that can stain the carpet? Wasn't me. And then they all start finger pointing and blaming each other. I saw her with the marker on the floor. No, you didn't. You're lying about me. And then they go and they take a swipe at each other. I'm going like, hey. It's a pen. It has nothing to do with violence and hitting. Knock it off, guys, before I hit you. I'm kidding on the last part. No, I just say, how do you manage that stuff? And why do they have those angers? And we hear a lot of parents and teachers and people will say, punch pillows. That's a great way to cope with a child's anger. And that's a common piece of advice that children hear regarding how to manage their own anger. And the idea behind this advice is that people have to let their anger out or they're just going to explode aggressively, or they'll implode, or they'll start burying it all and they'll be ulcer-ridden in their 20s. And unfortunately, there's not a shred of evidence, not a shred, folks, that punching pillows is helpful at all. In fact, venting anger tends to become a rehearsal to intensify anger. So there's got to be a better way. And at the same time, I look at my children and I go, why are my kids so angry? They're angry if we don't bring them something from the store. Rainey and I left the 3 of them home yesterday. At 10 years old, Flynn is old enough to be left alone. I left him my phone. We went 5 minutes away to the Walmart to pick up some groceries and a couple of necessities. And so we said, call us if there's any issues, lock the doors. And we step out for a half an hour, leaving the 3 kids at home. They watch cartoons, play, and stuff like that. And it went just fine. They called us a couple of times. The little one called on the phone. Hi, just wanted to say hi. When you coming home? Yeah, we'll be home in 20 minutes. And so we left the kids. And every one of them seemed to have these, the little one keeps learning from the middle one, keeps learning from the older one. And so there's anger that goes on. I'm like, why is everybody so angry? I don't remember being an angry child. We did things. There were things that made us mad and angry, yes. But what makes an angry child, and how do you cope with that? There's one study that a guy named Brad Bushman angered college student participants by giving them evaluations. And supposedly from another study participant on an essay that they'd written. And the fake evaluations were extremely critical and included comments such as like this: "This is one of the worst essays I've ever read," as well as very poor scores on numerical ratings of qualities such as organization, originality, and clarity. And so next, the participants either saw a picture of their supposed critic and they hit a punching bag while thinking about that person. Venting condition, anyone? And they hit a punching bag while thinking about exercise and physical fitness, active distraction condition. Or they just sat quietly for 2 minutes, control condition, And afterwards, those in venting condition reported feeling angrier and behaved more aggressively than the control group. And the people in the active distraction group were less angry, but not less aggressive than the venting group. Participants in the control group just waited, and they had the lowest levels of anger and aggression. So, what we've got to do with anger, especially when we see it in our kids, and even when we see it in each other, in ourselves, is we have to understand the process of emotional regulation. If punching pillows is likely just to intensify your anger, or a child's anger in this case, what are the better strategies that we can use to teach our kids how to cope with getting pissed off? And to answer that question, we have to take a step back and look at how emotions come about. What causes anger emotions? Especially in kids, when we're talking about kids. What do kids have to be angry about? They get everything put on a silver platter for them. For God's sake. You know, we might give them chores to do and stuff like that as they start getting a little older. And we even started chores when they were young, 3, 4, and 5. You know, they aren't effective at much, but yeah, you can help put the silverware away from the dishwasher and stuff like that. So, in taking this step back, there's a James Gross, in his process model of emotional regulation, outlines 5 points in which people can alter their own emotional responses to things. Now, folks, you guys listen to this, because we all get angry. We all have our moments. Now, I'm not talking blind rage here. I'm talking about anger, and anger that's distracting, anger that might be passed on to other people. Here's 5 things. Number 1, situation selection. Now, that involves seeking out or avoiding situations that are likely to trigger particular emotions. So if you know politics, let's say, pisses you off, gets you angry, maybe you need to select better what you present to yourself. The things you let in the eyes and let in the ears. The things you boil about or cogitate over. Sometimes anger is good, by the way. Righteous indignation is a good anger. There's a lot of things to be righteously angry about and a lot of things to be rageful about over the state of our politics and political correctness and all of that stuff rolled together. But choose your trigger points. Choose them. Select. So it's called situation selection. You select the situation. Number 2, selection modification. That involves doing things to alter a situation in order to change its emotional impact. How many of you are pissed off that you're at home? Or that your job is effectively shut down? Or you're not earning enough money and you don't know where the money's going to come to pay the bills? Because while the whole nation can shut down, the bills don't shut down. I think there should be a law that says if we're going to mandate the closing of companies and the possibility of people losing their jobs, that we need to mandate the issuing of invoices. Nobody, well, and you see the holes in that already. Everybody's got to live, and it takes money to live, unless you're a survivalist and you got a big garden out back and it hasn't snowed on top of it all winter. So there it is. It's situation modification. Change the conditions of the test. If you're a Star Trek fan, Captain Kirk in The Wrath of Khan and then repeated in the later J.J. Abrams movies, what did Kirk do with the Kobayashi Maru test, which is the no-win scenario test that officers all have to go through? He reprogrammed the computers. And somebody said, "Oh, you cheated." He said, "No, I changed the conditions of the test." And then he takes a bite out of an apple and he says, "I don't believe in the no-win situation, the no-win scenario. There's always a way to win." And so, situation modification. So the Kobayashi Maru, for those of you in Kirk's unique solving of the Kobayashi Maru test, it was situation modification. All right. Attentional deployment is the third one, and this means using distraction or concentrating on something to lessen or heighten the emotional responses that our children have, or that we have. 4 is cognitive change. That means adjusting interpretation of an emotional triggering event, or judgments about an individual's capacity to cope with it. Cognitive change, cognitive, aware. There it is, aware. Be a little awake, be a little aware, be in the now. Cognitively change the things that are angering you. You can see how we can bring that to our kids. Cognitively change what's going on to create the anger. And the 5th one, of course, is response modulation. And this involves doing things to alter the psychological, experiential, or behavioral aspects of an emotional reaction after it's been generated. Now, some response modulation strategies may have the situation cycling back through the earlier steps. Now, parents can help their children with every step of the emotion regulation process. Take the example of a child who gets angry at a sibling for knocking over a block tower, or in our case, getting shot in the head with a Nerf gun when you weren't participating. You're sitting there reading a book and boom, your brother shoots you with a Nerf gun because he thinks it's great to harass his sister. And so when these things happen, parents could influence situation selection by making sure the child isn't tired or hungry, and therefore more prone to responding angrily. Okay, yeah, that's a very, what I would call a very passive way of handling aggression, handling anger. And so situation modification could involve anticipating the mishap and instructing your kids, the child, to move the block tower to a place where it's less likely to get knocked over. It's like my kid got mad at me. My little 5-year-old darling queen of the universe got mad at me last night because I walked out of my office and I strode through the kitchen, which had their stuff all over. Somebody pulled the ottoman from the sofa out into the kitchen, and there's a chair pulled out from that. I'm running the obstacle course, trying to make it over to the coffee, and I step on something and take a couple of steps, and I look down. I think it's the typical toy, and what it is, her brand new, we got this for her to play with in the house while everybody's sequestered in the house. The little plastic, clear things that you hang in the windows of your house, and they paint them like stained glass, but it's painted plastic stuff. And she painted them all, and against Mom's directions, did it on the floor of the kitchen and left them drying all over the floor of the kitchen. What does Dad do? I run the obstacle course to get over to the coffee maker, and I step on a couple of them. And before I realize it, I've already tracked yellow and blue paint, which thank goodness is water-based, all over the slate floor. And I'm like, I look down and I'm like, God damn it. I said, all right. I said, whose thing is this? I've just tracked paint all over the floor. And little Ellery gets mad at me. Those are my things and you stepped on them. I'm like, sweetie, I didn't see them. I'm sorry. Daddy's sorry, but you can't leave that stuff on the floor, which is what Mom told her. But she was angry. That was her block tower being knocked over. At least it wasn't deliberate. Now, attention deployment might mean suggesting something else to do, a snack, doing your project in another place, moving the block tower to a place where it's less likely to get knocked over, trying to distract the child from the mishap that has taken place. Cognitive change might involve explaining to the child that the sibling knocked it over by accident, or that the tower can be easily rebuilt, or that they shouldn't, put your painted objects to dry in the middle of the kitchen floor. Things like that. Explain to them a better way to do things. Now, that doesn't always work when they're mad at you. But, it's something to try. Response modulation could involve helping the child rebuild the tower, or encouraging the child to use their words instead of being pissed off, to ask the sibling to move over, or to help her pick up the blocks, or in my case, to help her pick up the painted pieces that were now kind of ruined. And so we did that, and I helped her clean up. I had to clean up the footprints. I didn't make her clean up my painty footprints. And so within this framework, the first 4 steps constitute antecedent-focused emotion regulation. And we're going to come back and talk about that after this break. So you guys sit tight. Yeah, we're already at the end of the first segment. We'll be right back. All right, folks, we're back. Thanks for sitting through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network, or you're watching it live over on my YouTube channel in video, and that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over, join the live chat room, add your 2 cents worth in, get to meet the Intrepid family that's over there. Have a good time. Now, we kind of left off, we're talking about anger management in our kids. And maybe you are already aware of any problems that might exist with your kids in this. Maybe you're aware, let's apply it to ourselves as well. Never does good to point a finger at anyone, even if it's your own kid, when you're not looking at how you might bring things to the table. And we're going to talk about that as well. So if you got kids at home, and you're going through this self-sequestration, this self-quarantining, which is mild. Nobody's mandating it. They're not running the military through the streets and going to arrest you. There's no curfews or anything like that. But everything's kind of closing down in a reaction to trying to not spread the virus, at least for another month, a couple weeks to a month. So what happens when you're around your kids and your kids are home from school? And you're seeing more of the things that you might see in other times when they're not at school, but now you're seeing it concentrated. Suddenly it's thrust upon us all to be together. And parents who might not be working, do you think we can pass our anger on to our kids? Yeah, we can. So how do we deal with it in our kids? So I ended by saying within this framework of response modulation, cognitive change, attention deployment, all of these things, when there's a problem, and I use kind of a silly example of knocking over the block tower, or in my case, stepping in my kid's painted stuff, which she left on the kitchen floor. So within this framework, the first 4 steps constitute the antecedent-focused emotional regulation. And that's the first 4 steps of that. Remember, I said that there's 5 points at which people can alter their emotional responses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Situation selection, situation modification, attention deployment, or attentional deployment as it's stated, cognitive change, and response modification. So within that, the first 4 of these steps is response-focused that's the final. It's the antecedent-focused. You know what an antecedent is? It's like when you structure a sentence and you say the topic of that sentence has to have an antecedent. If you're talking about something, you can say, and he was very angry. Well, what's the antecedent to that? The thing that he was angry about, all right? So the final step is a response-focused regulation, because that involves adjusting what people do to cope with an emotion that's already fully emerged. And it's often easier and more effective to manage emotions earlier rather than later in the process. Do you think it's easy to get angry? Is it easier to manage it once you've blown up, or easier to manage it once you know how to help avoid it? And so, seen within this context, it isn't surprising that punching pillows to try to manage your anger after the anger's already happened isn't really effective. It does nothing to alter the situation or how children view it. So that's what that was all about. Talking about that idea of expressing your anger through, go ahead, here's the pillow, punch your pillow. All right, Roger, that was very good. Now pass the pillow on to Sarah and let Sarah punch the pillow. You know, that doesn't always work, all right? That's antecedent focus. Now, how can we teach our kids anger management? And how can we actually teach ourselves in the process? How can we help our children learn to manage their emotions? Now, here's some guidelines, all right? These are pretty basic. It's kind of like me saying when I found out the school board paid $1.5 million to teach kids how to not bully each other in school. $1.5 million? I said, I'll do it for half that, and here's my 3 points. Don't be an asshole. Treat everybody the way you want to be treated. And use your common sense. Boom. $750,000, please. Well, it's almost that simple. Number 1, put safety first. So when children are very angry, they might want to lash out in aggressive ways. I watch my 10-year-old boy do this all the time. He's angry about something. Somebody touched his card collection set, and he wants to start hitting people. Now, I don't mean he doesn't go into a violent berserker rage, where he takes everyone out. But he's pretty handsy, touchy when he gets mad. And I'm like, son, don't touch other people. Keep your hands to yourself. And so, and I tell him, when you get that mad, you come and talk to me. And that's usually not a good idea either, because all they want to do is come and tattle on each other sometimes. So, when children are angry, they might lash out in aggressive ways, even violence. And so when prevention wasn't possible, often the first step in anger management is to help children stay away from the situation, to calm down. I tell my kids, I say, hey, you guys, just don't hang around with each other right now. You, go over there, go up to your room and do your thing. You, stay away from him when he's doing his thing. Vice versa. And so this can also prevent further escalation. Out of control children need parents to step in. Gently, but firmly, so they don't hurt each other's or break things. And so I always try to step in when I have to. Rainey tries to step in. Sometimes they just piss us off, and we react angrily. Do you think that's where they might get it sometimes? It's worth looking into, worth taking note of, and making adjustments. So 2, talk things through with your kids. Once your child is calmed down enough to think clearly, let your child tell you what happened. I hate it when my children want to try to tell me everything that's wrong with everything and why they're angry about it while they're pissed off. It's not worth listening to. And if they're both there trying to plead their case and one doesn't let the other one talk, it escalates. So I tell them both, shut up. Everybody, quiet. One person at a time. Take a deep breath, son. Take a deep breath, daughter. Okay. Now that you've calmed down, you go first. Tell me what's going on. And let them think clearly. Let your child tell you what's happening, what they're thinking about. Sometimes I shut down some of my kids because all they want to do, I'm like, Dad doesn't want to, if it's tattling, Dad doesn't want to hear it. Leave my office. Go away. Guys, you figure out how to get along. Figure it out. You know how to get along. You know what to do. We've been through this many times. So figure out how to work it. And if you can't, I'll help you. Yeah, but Dad, you know what he did? And I'm like, I said I don't want to hear tattling. But you won't let me talk. I said, I will let you talk as long as it's not tattling. And then she harumphs and storms off. So a recent study by Wainwright and colleagues, this was in 2018, they show that just telling a narrative of an anger-inducing event can help children and teens feel less angry, both immediately and even a week later. Explaining the sequence of events slows children down, engages the thinking part of their brain. Express empathy. This is what the parent has to do. You have to empathize with your kid. So your child feels heard and feels comforted. I know sometimes when I say no tattling, one of my kids especially feels like she's not heard. You don't listen to anything I say. I said, I listen to everything you say. I said, but today and at this moment, I'm not listening to tattling. Keep that to yourself. But we listen to their problems. Talk to me. Tell me what's on your mind. Why did this happen? Why did you hit her? Why did you kick his things? Blah, blah, blah. You know how that goes. You let him talk it out. And after you do that, you can ask questions that help your child understand other people's perspectives and to use healthy communication or problem solving. For example, you could ask, what could you say to him in response to that? Or how is she likely to react if you do that? What can we do to prevent this from happening again? What could you do to make things a little better right now? This moment, it's already in the past, it's happened, we're pissed off. What can we do to change it now? What do you think we can do? I made my son and my daughter sit in 2 chairs in the kitchen last weekend and look each other in the eye. I said, do not avert your gaze. It's not a staring contest, but you look at each other in the face, in the eye. And I said, do not stop looking, and you can't say anything for 5 minutes while I'm finishing loading the dishwasher here. I'm going to load the dishwasher. When I'm done in 5 minutes, let's start talking. Oh, they hated that, but I made them look at each other. And some of the first questions I asked them, I said, would you like that I ship one of you away? We'll adopt you out. And I said, now, that might not be the best strategy, but for my kids, they're like, no, we don't want that. I said, okay, so you know you got to live with each other. And you know we're not going to do that, so how do we get through your problems here? And so responding to children's anger with gentleness and compassion, sometimes sarcasm on my part, makes it easier for children to deal with strong feelings and think through things. And what happened last night? The kids were yelling about something, and Rainey was yelling, and I was mad that they did something. I can't think of what it was. I'm like, we've been through this 100 times. Why did you do that? Because it's creating a problem now. And then somebody farted. It wasn't me. Somebody farted, and then everybody starts giggling. And I'm like, I don't want to giggle right now. I said, I'm pissed off. But it was funny. That was a good one. Whoever did that was resonant. Then, of course, when you compliment the fart, everybody wants to claim it. It was me. It was me. It was me. So angry or punitive responses to children's anger add to the children's stress. When they're already feeling overwhelmed, the kid doesn't process things like an adult, guys. I think we all know that, at least to some certain degree. A kid is a kid, not an adult. So why yell at them like somebody in a bar room who's just offended your girlfriend or your honor somehow, or cheated at pool, when they're just a kid? and they're pissed off about something that pisses off a kid. So you got to be empathetic to that. Number 3 is model appropriate expression. Model appropriate expression. What does that mean? What does it mean to model something? Model appropriate expression. Children learn more from what we do than what we say. So when parents respond to their own anger in aggressive ways, they not only trigger more anger in children, they also teach that yelling, hitting sometimes, which doesn't happen here, by the way. Rainey and I do not hit each other. There's some yelling sometimes, or being mean are appropriate ways to behave when you're angry. If we act that way as parents, what do you think our kids are going to do? So everyone feels angry sometimes, but we want to teach our kids that it's possible to feel angry and still treat others respectfully. That's like the old Bible verse. It says, be angry, but don't sin in the process. Or how about another Bible verse? Let not the sun go down on your wrath. Boom. Always kiss me goodnight. We have that little sign in our bedroom. Always kiss me goodnight. And so don't go to bed angry or hot. And overall, guys, effective anger management requires the children learn. They learn. They're taught and they learn to think about and manage the full process of emotional regulation. So addressing the situation, their internal thoughts, their reactions, their external behaviors, and how that impacts other people or the situation is essential. The strategy of punching pillows implies that anger is something that needs to be gotten rid of, and it's something that you can physically manifest in order to express it and release it. Well, that's just not the truth. It's a source of information about ourselves and our environment. Children need to learn to understand it, to cope with it in ways that make their lives better. And you know what? They're only going to learn to cope with it if they see it modeled correctly. What are all the things that we do that model to our children that we don't do it the way we ask them to do it? What do you do to model to your kids that there's a better way to handle yourself when you're angry about things? There's a better way to process your anger with the other person that's involved. Think about it for yourself. Do a little self-examination on this and ask yourself, are you modeling things to your kids in the right way and the way you ought to model things to your kids? Now, in my experience, I've run across a lot of people who are products of toxic parents. And I look at this and I say, are we ever toxic to our own kids? Can we be toxic and handle ourselves in a toxic way with our families? Toxicity is next to abuse on an emotional level and on a different level. And it's like the gateway. Toxicity is the gateway drug to abuse, so to speak, in my opinion. And so there's ways to manage your relationship that preserve your mental health, your emotional health. But there's 4 signs that you might be the adult child of a toxic parent. Did you learn the bad ways to do things? And now go 20 years in the future in your mind and say, could this be talking to my kids 20 years from now? Are you the child of a toxic parent? Kid 20 years in the future? So ask yourself this. There's ways to managing. Managing toxic people in your life is very different based on your relationship to the individual that's toxic. For example, if you have a toxic friend or you're dating someone out there that's toxic. It's possible to restrict, limit, or even cease your contact and your interactions with those individuals to remove yourself from any kind of negative impact that they might have on your life. However, what happens when the toxic individuals are your parents or the parents of your spouse or your partner? What do you do when the toxicity comes from there? And the options for simply eliminating the relationship are often not realistic or impossible, or even possible. In these types of situations, and in particular with toxic parents, finding effective ways to manage the relationship, to preserve your own emotional health, is a critical consideration. Think of the comedy that is built around for decades around, guys and the way they think about their mothers-in-law. The mother-in-law's coming to visit. Barney, we're going bowling. The mother-in-law's coming over tonight. Those kinds of situations. Who's toxic in your adult sphere within your family? And how do you cope with those things? Without breaking any personal boundaries here that are set, I have problems with some of my in-laws. I've had problems with some of them. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with those things? Because it can create a toxicity that leaves your spouse feeling like you don't care about my family at all. And so not only is perhaps their toxicity valid, and you got to find a way to deal with it, but then you got to deal with what you do to your spouse if you don't want to see their family. Or if you want to help them understand the toxicity that you're feeling. Wow, you open up all kinds of cans of worms. So here's some of the common signs of a toxic parent or parent-in-laws, whichever they might be. All right? 1, highly negative reactive. Toxic parents are emotionally out of control. They tend to dramatize even minor issues, and they see any possible slight as a reason to become hostile, angry, verbally abusive, or destructive. So that's your parent or your parents-in-law. They're highly negatively toxic, negatively reactive. And so that's one sign that you've got a toxic parent. They become hostile and angry at everything. Everything's a slight. It's almost like Trump derangement syndrome. There's nothing the president can do for some people in this country that is good. And when he does good things, they don't want to credit him with that. You know what that is, actually? That's the same syndrome, if you will. It's highly negative reactive. So, number 2, lack of empathy. The toxic person or parent isn't able to empathize with anybody else. Instead, everything is about them and their needs, and they fail to see how they could be seen by others as disruptive, harmful, or hurtful. And even when they do, they want to gloss over it. Has been some of my experience. So number 3 is they're extremely controlling. Any of you have controlling in-laws or controlling parents? Controlling. My ex-wife. Her mom was controlling. I remember she once looked at me because they helped us out financially when we were first married. And we're talking like 35 years ago. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, something like that. And in the late 80s, we were married. And they helped us out with something financially. A couple $1,000. And I remember my mother-in-law was drinking. We were on Thanksgiving. We were at her house. And we're all watching football, and everybody was up and out during a break, and I was still sitting in the chair. She walks by me with her drink in her hand, and she looks at me, and she goes, "I have you under my thumb. I have all the power of the strings to pull." And I looked at her, and I said, "Where'd that come from?" "I just want you to know I'm in control of your life." And I said, "Oh, okay, thank you." I said, I'll try to remember that when I'm not paying any attention to you. And our relationship never improved, by the way. And she didn't have anything to do with that divorce, by the way, in case you're wondering. So maybe they're extremely controlling. The most toxic the individual, the more they want to control everything and everybody in their vicinity. This means overparenting, making unreasonable demands, or even on adult children. Then you've got the parents who are highly critical. The toxic parent cannot or will not see the achievements of their children, regardless of how accomplished the child is or becomes as an adult. They're constantly putting down people around them while making themselves out to be exceptional or gifted or talented. And it doesn't even have to be those things. Those all take different forms. But they're critical of others, not critical of what they do. And then there's the blaming everybody else. The disharmony, the disagreements, the hostility, the family breakdown that's caused by toxic parenting is always the fault of somebody else. Well, he's a jerk, so I have to be this way. Or she's an idiot, and she stole my boy from me, and whatever it might be, as cliche as that one sounded. So these parents can't take responsibility for the problems that they create, but they blame the rest of the family, and they twist or manipulate how they see these events. Now imagine if that's what they're like when you're an adult, and you're married, or you got a partner, or you've got a parent that's doing this and causing an effect on you and your partnership. Imagine what they may have instilled when you were a child, thinking back to your child now, 20 years from now. How will you be with your children? How will they have viewed you as a parent when they were kids? So how do you handle toxic parents? Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left in tonight's show, and so we might pick this up because, we will pick this up tomorrow, because tomorrow I want to talk about boundaries and distancing and this whole codependency thing that goes on. So let's start with this, and we'll go as far as we can take it. How do you handle a toxic parent? The first and most important factor for adult children of toxic parents to realize is that they can only control their own behaviors. You can't control what your parents do or what anybody else does, not even what your partner does. You can only control your own behavior. They don't have to have the ability to change or control the behaviors of their parents or their own parent, or nor should they even choose to want to. You don't have the ability to change anybody. So shut up when you try to change somebody and look inward. You are the only one you can change. Now, if you can't change their behavior, and the behavior is bad and it's affecting you in your relationship, how are you supposed to act? So recognizing, accepting that the parent is toxic and is not willing to change allows you to have the freedom to consider your own needs. Now, this is all about you, folks. This is where this all zeroes in on you, or me, the self, what we're doing. And this is us. You have to have the ability to define the relationship. And you have to define it to meet your emotional needs and to avoid subjecting yourself to negativity, to hostility, to toxicity in the attempt to fix the problem. Do you know how debilitating it can be to think that the onus is on you to fix somebody else's problem? Doesn't work. So, folks, we're out of time, but a couple of things: boundaries, control the location, self-care. These are things that we'll get into tomorrow, because we're going to talk about this a little bit more, and then we're going to talk about codependency tomorrow. I think these are important things because we all experience this stuff. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.